Okay. Hello and welcome to Lolita Sewing 101. My name is Wren. This is the official YouTube version of the panel that I first presented at KatsuCon 2025. This is a little bit different than the one that I did at KatsuCon 2025 because one of the wonderful things about us humans is that we get to learn new stuff all the time. So I've added more information. All right. Super quickly, a little bit about me, why I'm specifically the one presenting this. I have been sewing for about 20 years now. I went to Virginia Commonwealth University for fashion design. I currently work as a professional seamstress. Yes, it's sewing awnings, but yeah, it's still sewing. And I talk about this on the internet, mostly on TikTok, but now here on YouTube. And now let's go ahead and get into it. No sponsors, no nothing, just me. So first up, I have sewing and Lolita terms. This is not intended to go over every single sewing term or every single Lolita term. If I were to, this would be a much, much longer presentation, and I don't have the time nor energy for that. So we'll start with Lolita terms. And these are just the terms that I'll be using today. First up, a JSK, which stands for jumper skirt. It is a sleeveless dress. It will have straps like these and will normally in Lolita be worn with a blouse. But it is a dress that does not have sleeves as a part of it. Bloomers, they are a form of undergarment. They're essentially just poofy shorts. Super cute. Sometimes they're long enough to peek out a little bit underneath the skirt intentionally. Sometimes they're not. And lollyable. Lollyable refers to something that can be used in Lolita, but is not specifically made for Lolita. For example, sometimes I'll use like vintage jewelry in my cords. This is not intended to be worn with Lolita, but it goes really well with it. And the cupcake or bell-shaped silhouette and an A-line silhouette. These are the two styles of petticoats that are used in Lolita. Cupcake and bell shape refer to the same style where it goes out a little bit at the hips before going down, while A-line goes directly diagonal out from the waist. And now on to sewing terms. First up, notions. These are any materials other than fabric that are necessary for a given project. This is things like zippers, lace, trims, bias tape, buttons, elastic, whatever you need other than the fabric. Outside of the fashion world, the term pattern means something different than what it means in the fashion world. What you would call a pattern outside the fashion world is called a print in the fashion world. A pattern refers to essentially a stencil. These stencils, these patterns, are used to cut out the individual shapes of a particular garment to make sure it fits the body. Drafting is the process of creating and editing patterns. And grading is the process of changing the size of a pattern, sizing them up or down as need be. A running stitch is the only stitch that I will refer to by name during this presentation. It is the most basic hand stitch. You just go through, over, through, over, through, and you want to make these approximately even. Gathering. I will go over gathering in more detail later. It is a technique that is used to create ruffles. And lastly, for sewing terms for today, seam allowance. This is an extra amount of fabric around the pattern to give your project more structural integrity. You would sew the distance of the seam allowance from the very edge of the fabric. Standard in the industry, this is about 3/8 of an inch to 1/2 of an inch. But if you're a beginner, it may be helpful to have a larger seam allowance. And now we get into sewing tools. This is what's really necessary and what's not. Your bare bones necessities. This is what you need to get in order to start sewing. That is a needle, thread, scissors, fabric, and notions. There are a ton of other things that are very helpful, but if you've never sewn before and you're not even 100% sure if it's something you'll enjoy, this is all you need to get to try it out. You do not need to invest in anything other than these products if you do not know for sure you'll enjoy sewing. And now some very helpful additions. I would very much recommend getting these things, but again, they are not 100% necessary to start. Pins. Now, there is a reason that these are not on the bare bones necessities list, and that is because as a professional seamstress, at my job, we do not use pins under any circumstances. If we can't hold something together with our hands, we use clips, and even that's very rare. I do find them extremely helpful in my home sewing, so I would recommend them, but it is possible to go without. A seam ripper. Again, extremely helpful. If you are able to get one, I would recommend it, but if necessary, you can do the same exact thing with a needle, a pin, or a very small pair of scissors. Separate scissors for fabric, paper, and thread. Again, not 100% necessary. I would very much recommend it. This will just, more than anything, increase the longevity of your blades. A sewing machine. Everything that can be done on a sewing machine can be done by hand, just slower. If you are interested in getting a sewing machine, my personal recommendation would be to try and find an older Singer machine. Look for around the year 2000 or before, and look at places like Facebook Marketplace or local thrift shops. You can actually find one for pretty cheap most of the time. If you're interested in a new machine, I think Brother machines are really great starter machines. I personally have a Husqvarna Viking, but these things are pricey. Mine was purchased 10 years ago for $800. Both rigid and flexible rulers. Rigid rulers are going to be more for flat work, any sort of drafting, any sort of like tracing onto fabric or paper. And flexible rulers, tape measure, if you will be for your own personal body measurements. If necessary, you can use some string and a marker to take measurements. A hip curve. These are really excellent tools for drafting. They create a nice smooth curve for anything that needs a curve. If you're not going to be drafting patterns, you do not need one of these. Now let's discuss a couple of options for pre-made patterns. The Gothic and Lolita Bible. You can purchase physical copies secondhand on places like Mercari or eBay, and sometimes they even pop up on Amazon. Digital scans can be found online. In particular, I want to point out Cho Lolita on LiveJournal. They have the largest collection of PDFs of the actual physical patterns that are in the back of the magazine that I have personally seen in one place. They have volumes 3, 4, 6, 11, 12, 13, 16, 17, 21, 22, 23, and 26. Volume 3 in particular, if I remember correctly, actually has a pattern for an old school usakumya where they were like a little bit creepy. Lolita History is another great place to look for Gothic and Lolita Bible scans. From what I personally have been able to tell, it seems that they have like the actual physical pages of it scanned and not necessarily the PDFs of the physical patterns in the back. With those scans, you can still see the shapes of the patterns, and they are to scale with one another. The biggest pro of the Gothic and Lolita Bible patterns is that they are authentic. they are coming from legitimate Lolita brands. Like, there's volumes that include full dresses by Angelic Pretty, by Baby the Stars Shine Bright, by Innocent World. They also include a ton of accessories, and there's a ton of different volumes to look at. There are two main cons for this particular series of patterns. They are only one size. Japanese patterns tend to be a little bit more difficult, not only in the aspect of translating them to English, and if you don't speak Japanese, Google Translate can only do so much, but because the pattern pieces overlap. They're kind of overwhelming to look at. Next up, Otome no Sewing. Physical copies can be purchased on Amazon, on Etsy, on Mercari, again, all kinds of places, and there are a ton of options to find digital versions. For pros, once again, these are authentic Japanese patterns, and online translations are much more easily available than with the Gothic and Lolita Bible. I would recommend taking a look at Miss Carol Bell. I don't know if she has every single Otome no Sewing, but she has most of them, and most of them are translated. As for cons, these do require some drafting. Not every single garment shown in the Otome no Sewing has a pattern in the back, but it will show you how to draft the pattern. And again, Japanese patterns are just a little bit more difficult, namely with all of the overlap. Next up, we have Simplicity patterns. Physical patterns are available on Simplicity's website, potentially not for all that much longer, which is tragic since they're under liquidation as well. But you can actually find these patterns secondhand as well. Biggest pros, these patterns are extremely affordable when they're on sale. A few months ago, I went to a Joann's and grabbed a bunch of these patterns for $1.99 each. These do come in multiple sizes, and Simplicity is generally considered the easiest among commercial patterns. If you want to be drafting the majority of your patterns, Simplicity does also have these. Personally, I think sleeves are the most difficult thing to draft, so having like patterns of these packs that are just different styles of sleeves are extraordinarily helpful. Now, the biggest con for the Simplicity patterns are more of a moral issue than anything else. So the image there, in particular, these patterns are replicas. If you're not super familiar, in Lolita, replicas do put brands out of business, but it is perfectly legal for pattern companies to make replica patterns. So it's a little bit iffy. Personally, my take on it is if you're weighing your pros and cons, you decide this is your best option for you. It is not a moral failure to make something for yourself or a loved one. Now, it is worth noting that to the extent of my knowledge, at least, not all of them are replicas. Specifically 8444 and 8127 include replicas. 8444 takes from an indie brand, and 8127 takes from Mary Magdalene. As for which ones are Lolita patterns, there's 8671, 1300, 8127, S9735, and 8233 is kind of a Lolita pattern. One of the two is Lolita adjacent, and then the other one is the pink dress from Black Butler. Etsy patterns. So you can purchase physical or digital patterns on Etsy. In particular, I'm pointing out Tea and Threadle Shop. They make specifically Lolita patterns. Not all of the patterns that you will find on Etsy are specifically Lolita, but there are a ton of lollyable options as well. These patterns typically have a wider size range than commercial patterns. I've seen patterns on Etsy go up to a 7XL. There's tons of variety, and you are supporting small businesses or even just an individual. The only real con about Etsy patterns is that there's no guarantee of consistency between shops. One shop may make an excellent pattern and someone else may make a subpar pattern, and there's just no way to tell without looking at the reviews, and even then you might have a different experience in the reviews. Now we are on to a few other resources. Many of these I have not used personally, so I couldn't really tell you pros or cons of them, but they are definitely places that are worth taking a look. For example, $20 Lolita, they have both a Tumblr blog and a WordPress blog where they discuss purchasing and making Lolita for a really tight budget. Lolita model Misako Aoki also has a sewing book. It leans a little bit more to Pink House style, so the dresses are longer, a little more mature, but still very cute, very fanciful. A couple places to get free patterns. You can look at moodfabric.com, So Easy, Threads Monthly, and Fabric Store. Now again, there is no guarantee that any of the patterns on there will be Lolita, but there's bound to be some lollyable options, even if it takes a little bit of editing. For plus size patterns, the Kirby Sewing Collective is probably the go-to on here. They have a ton of resources that link to plus-sized places that sell patterns, and they have people that do reviews of these patterns to tell you a bit more about how the fit works. Cashmerette has a ton of great options for patterns. It leans very mainstream, but I'd like to point out in particular the Upton dress, which I think with literally some lace around the collar and some buttons and ribbons, it actually looks really similar to this one Innocent World dress. Twig and Tail is more of a cottagecore vibe, which I think can be adapted very, very easily into Lolita. And if you're interested in custom patterns, Tailor Nova is the easier of the two custom patterns that I have here. It's just picking and choosing different aspects of a piece that you want, and you can just get it printed out and delivered to you. That one does cost money. Seamly 2D is free. It is an open source program that has quite the learning curve, and I am trying. It is a free place to make your own digital patterns. Whew, and now we're into the second half. And now we're getting into drafting patterns. This is going to be the most information dense portion of the video. I'm so sorry. We have a bunch of measurements that are necessary for drafting patterns. You can see this measurement chart here, I assume here. In order to make these pieces today, you'll need a high bust measurement, a full bust measurement, a waist measurement, a distance from the high bust to the waist, a distance from the waist to where you want a skirt to end, and the distance from the waist to where you would want bloomers to end, as well as the leg thickness where you want those bloomers to end. It is super important that for every single pattern piece that I show in this section, you want to add seam allowance on all sides. You want to add, in most cases, 3/8 of an inch to 1/2 of an inch on all sides. You'd want to sew along that 3/8, 1/2 an inch. Whatever you decide to do, if you want to make the seam allowance larger, make it larger. Do not make the seam allowance smaller than you feel comfortable with. I have 4 sets of instructions for drafting today, and I've tried my best to put them in order of difficulty. So the skirt version 1, all you really need are 2 rectangles. One that is the length of your waist and 2 to 3 inches wide. I would recommend doing 2 of these waistbands and sewing them together, which I will display with a sample later. 3 inches is generally your max for a waistband. Any more than that and it'll just sort of end up a little odd on the body. For the main body of the skirt, you just want it to be as long as you would like your skirt to end. In Lolita, this is generally about to your knees, but make it longer or shorter, however you want it to be. And you want it to be as wide as 2 to 3 times your waist measurement. The larger that this is, the fluffier this is going to be. The more you'll have to gather in, the larger it is, the poofier it'll be. For materials, you'll typically need about 2.5 to 3 yards of fabric, a 7-inch zipper or other closure. I say a 7-inch zipper specifically because standard in the fashion industry, you want to have a zipper end 7 inches below your natural waist. If you want to make this longer, make it longer. I would not recommend making a zipper any shorter than the 7 inches for this project. Other closure can be things like a row of snaps or a row of buttons. Zippers definitely take practice to get good at, but I personally think they're just the best option. So you want to start by cutting out the waistband. Again, I personally cut out 2 waistbands and sew them together at the top. Then you cut out the body. You gather the top of the body to the length of the waistband. Now, gathering is a technique that I think is genuinely the most important technique to learn in making Lolita. You just run a stitch across the top. If you're doing it on a sewing machine, you want to make sure you have a larger stitch width. If you are doing it by hand, you want to do a running stitch. If you're doing it after a sewing machine, you want to grab onto one of the 2 threads. If you're doing it by hand, there will just be 1 thread. And you don't want to knot it, at least on one side. Once you've got that, all you need to do is just pull. So there's already the bit of ruffle there. You gently take it in your hands and push it around as need be. I wrap the thread around my hand as I go because this extra thread's just going to get in the way if you don't deal with it. And you want to make sure the gathers are approximately even as you can make them across the entire thing. Then you want to sew the waistband to the body. And you want to sew everything with good sides together. If you have a print on one side, you want to make sure that the 2 pieces, that the print is facing each other when you do this. You then sew across the top. If you're doing the 2 waistbands like I have, you would sew across here. Then you can see the seam in here. Flip it over and sew along here. If you want to be fancy about it, you can turn it over once more. This will just make your clothing look higher quality. It is harder to do. If it's your first one, don't worry about it too much. Then you want to fold the entire piece in half, good sides together. And you want to start at the bottom, sew up to where the zipper will end. Then at this point, you would add a zipper in, turn it all right side out. It looks super cute. Then you would want to do a hem by just turning up the bottom. You can turn it up once for a roll 1 hem, turn it up twice for a roll 2 hem, whatever you'd like to do. You can also add a ruffle by doing the same exact thing, where you would take a rectangle and gather it, attach it to the bottom. You can add lace here. Whatever you'd like to do, I'm just trying to bring you a building block. The hem can also be done before gathering. I don't think it particularly matters which way that you do it. I've had success both ways. The skirt version 2. The version 1 skirt is better for a cupcake silhouette. This is better for an A-line silhouette. You want 5 body pieces. So again, you'll want a very similar waistband. In fact, exactly the same waistband as the version 1. The skirt itself will be 5 pieces that are joined together. You want the top to be approximately half of your waist measurement, so that in total it'll be about 2.5 times your waist measurement. And again, you make it as long as you want your skirt to be. This will, once again, typically be about 2.5 to 3 yards of fabric. You know your body better than I do though, so if you need more or less, that will depend. And again, a 7-inch zipper or other style of closure. This is actually very similar to the version 1 skirt in terms of construction. You cut out the waistband, you cut out the body pieces. The only real difference is that you attach the body pieces together. So if I turn this around, again, this will be good sides together. If I had a print, it would all be on this side. When I sewed it, I'd have the 2 pieces together, sew straight down. It'll be in a sort of arc at the end. And then you would run your gathering stitch across the top, gather it in to the size of your waistband. You want to do your best to make sure that there's approximately an even amount of gathers in each individual panel. You'll then sew the waistband to the body, same exact way as version 1. Again, you'll fold the whole piece in half, so up to where the zipper will end, add in the zipper, and then sew the hem. You can also do the hem before gathering if you would like to. Next up, we have a pair of bloomers. I know this is a slightly overwhelming picture to look at, but you'll just need 2 pieces of fabric cut into this shape. The top, you want it to be your waist measurement, and the bottom you want to be 2 to 3 times your leg measurement where you want the bloomers to end. As for the U shape, you want from the top of that U to the bottom of that U to be the measurement from your waist to your crotch plus a little bit of breathing room. Underneath the U shape, you want it to be your desired length from your crotch to where you want it to end on your leg. Okay, materials for this, you will typically need about 1.5 yards of fabric, and you need elastic. You want to start by measuring your waist and your leg where you want it to end, and you want to cut pieces of elastic to those lengths. Then you would cut out your fabric, pin the fabric together up the U shape, and sew there. And this is probably the single most difficult instruction to convey, so pay attention. You're going to be flipping this around in a slightly weird way. So you open it up the sides, and you want to pin them together like this. You want to sew across here. Once you have that sewn together, it'll essentially just be a wide pair of pants. Let me show that once more. So you'll open up here underneath the U shape, and you'll take the 2 sides of the U shape. Now on both the top of one of the U shapes and either end of the section below them, you want to leave about 1 inch unsewn. This will just make it easier to thread elastic through later. You want to turn the hem up on the legs 1 inch, sew down at the very edge of it. Once you start by threading it through. Once you are at the end of the elastic, pin it down, pull the start of the elastic the rest of the way through, and sew that down at the end. I would recommend attaching a large safety pin to the elastic. This will give you something a little bit easier to hold on to as you thread it through. And you'll do the same thing at the waist. You'll turn it down, thread the elastic all the way through, and sew that down. You've got a pair of bloomers. All right. The JSK bodice. Even more difficult looking than the bloomers, but it's actually not that bad, I promise. For the center front, it'll be from the top. This is approximately your high bust to your waist. That's your desired length for the center of it. When I say on fold for the center front, you want to put that straight edge that'll go right here on a folded portion of the fabric, so you can cut around it once and you've got one singular piece of fabric. The curve between the center front and the side front is to accommodate for the natural curve of the body. So depending on like your bust size, that'll be either a more intense curve or a less intense curve. The center front to underarm, before adding seam allowance, you want to make sure that the two pieces, the center front and the side front, the total across the top of them is equal to the measurement from here to here, directly under your arm. And then the back is your underarm to your center back. Your two straps would be the measurement from here to your back. You want your back to be lower than your front, but the exact amount, that's up to you. You want to make sure that no matter what, it fits comfortably under your arm. If you want to add a lining, I would recommend adding a lining under two cases if the fabric you are using is sheer, or if you have textural issues about seams. I would recommend having a lining under those two cases, even if you're a beginner. Materials, you typically need about 1 yard of fabric just for the bodice, and then you'd want your additional fabric for the skirt. A zipper that goes from the top of the bodice to 7 inches below your waist. I buy my zippers in bulk. I believe my zippers are 22 inches and I just use that standard. Or if you'd rather use another closure, that's fine too. Start by cutting out all of the bodice pieces. You want to sew the side front to either side of the center front, and then a back piece to either of the side pieces of the side fronts. And when you do a lining, you do this exact same thing twice. For attaching straps, you want to have them sit around the seam between the center and side front. This seam is called a princess seam, and a lot of JSKs have them. And you'll see here on this dress, it's not exactly centered. This was actually one of the first JSKs that I made that I was proud of. It's close to center. It's about 1/2 inch off from center, but still the strap is near the seam. Now, if you're doing a lining, what you want to do is sandwich the straps in between the lining and the outside. You would have them right in there, and you sew everything in at the same time. That's this stitching right here, so that you can just flip it all right side out, and you have something that looks nice on both sides. You would then select a skirt style and attach the bottom to the bodice. Essentially, you want to treat the bottom of the bodice the same exact way you would treat the waistband. And then once that skirt is attached, you do it good sides together, add in a zipper. All right. Now this is where I would normally put questions. If you have any questions, please feel free to leave a comment. I will do my very best to answer them. I also have my socials here, but you found me on YouTube, and so I'll have everything else in the description. If you would like to support me, I would really appreciate a like and a follow. And if you are purchasing from 42 Lolita, I do have an affiliate code, Wren Eliza with 2 A's. That'll get you 5% off. But thank you so much for joining me in this video, especially if you've made it all the way to the end. I know this is a long one. I really appreciate it. I hope you have a lovely rest of your day. Bye-bye. Wait.
Plug your website.
Oh, songbirdatelier.bigcartel.com. You can purchase stuff I've made there.